Thanks a lot. Today's topic is about the clinical trials in the emerging markets. As the event goes today, which is the Pharmaceutical Regulatory Affairs, apart from the active pharmaceutical ingredients and the formulations that are manufactured across, the next important thing is basically the clinical trials. And thank you, Dr. Shivanand. You have very nicely indicated Tom and Jerry. Clinical trials have become actually a constant Tom and Jerry game. But it's not between the inventor of a drug and the guy who's actually made a test drug to test against it. But it's between the executors, the pharma industry, and the regulators. That's the Tom and Jerry game. We just go about looking at emerging markets. You know the mature markets which are already there, the United States and the Europe, which have been actually there conducting many trials, starting from preclinical up to the post-marketing surveillances. Now, if you look at the cost factor, even the patient recruitment part, emerging markets actually stand out. So I would like to briefly concentrate on some of the topics which are there. In between, I digress from it, and I would like to discuss with you and probably interact with you. You're welcome to and shoot questions in between. I don't mind. About certain dichotomies that are actually present. Some regulations tell you to do, and indirectly you are not allowed to do certain things. So we could discuss that. So mature markets in the pharmaceutical companies are facing huge challenges with few factors. One is patent expirations. In the US, there are so many products which are actually patented. You are not allowed to manufacture them. Now is the time for most of the products which are actually coming off the pipeline of the patents, and then they are getting into the generics market. So everybody would like to prepare those drugs under generic market. So the patent expirations are a big threat for the mature markets. So they case for the emerging markets to go for more products. A tougher regulatory environment, nevertheless. I mean, you have a whole lot of trials that are happening with serious adverse events happening, unreported, reported, and then there are regulations which are actually coming out. Things are getting more, very tighter for the regulatory markets, which are actually the mature markets. Downward pricing pressure. At the end of the day, if aspirin is manufactured by 100 people, they will have to share the pie, right? So that's the one threat. Diminishing returns to research and development. I mean, across the world, people have actually turned from manufacturing into R&D. Back home in Hyderabad, India, I should say that a lot of companies are concentrating now on the R&D. It's a 15 years old back, the way the people have actually put in a lot of money, including Dr. Reddy's laboratories. But for whatever reason, till this point of time, you can't even say one molecule is to my credit. In India, that's what I'm saying. But I find there are half a dozen Indians who are actually in California bringing out molecules in their name. And they have successfully launched in the US. So what's actually the difference that's happening here? It's the industry that is supporting, the regulatory industry that is supporting, the research environment that is created in the US is making them. Anyway, the concept of conducting clinical research in emerging markets is increasingly becoming more attractive to global clinical researchers for optimizing their commercial success. Please underline the word commercial success. At the end of the day, any research you take up, any manufacturing that you take up, the bottom line has to generate certain amount of revenue. That's a commercial success. So from a largely untapped and diverse patient population to less costly trial conduct, the emerging markets offer much promise in this increasingly competitive industry for international drug developers. This is the reason why the countries look at emerging markets. This is the reason why emerging markets have a case today in terms of a lot of positivities that actually they have. Further down in the presentation, we would discuss some of the factors which actually make the emerging markets more, amenable for clinical trials. just before we go into that, let's look at what are the emerging markets that we have. You have Argentina, Brazil, Chile, China, Colombia, Czech Republic, Egypt, Ghana, Hong Kong, India, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Korea, Malaysia, Mexico, Nigeria, Poland, Qatar, Russia, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Thailand, Turkey, United Arab Emirates. My friend from Saudi Arabia is sitting here. I was just talking to him some time back about the environment. We'll discuss something about it. So Ukraine and then Vietnam. The example of Saudi Arabia, what my friend was telling was that they have a lot of money, but there is no scientific bent of mind in the country. So they need to probably import some of the people from other places to do it. For UAE, there is a lot of scope for development. Not that India doesn't have. India shall also have that. Let's just look at the pharmaceutical industry in general before we go to the next of the slides. As per the 2012 Ernst & Young survey, what the industry faces, it's there in that, in terms of challenges that they actually face. One is basically the emerging science, new products and services, shifting demographies, evolving regulations, transforming business models and increasing stakeholder expectations, thereby helping pharmaceutical companies around the globe to address the challenges presented by this new world. These are all the changes that are actually looking at transformation of markets into emerging markets. It's something like your developed countries and developing countries. Emerging markets, you could say, are the developing countries. But as we know very well that we never would like to be constantly in the developing stage. We need to go into that mature markets. So there are some insights that are needed in the area. On the accounting part, the taxation part, the transaction recording part, the compliance part and business pharmaceutical industry trends, process issues, as well as annual reporting on pharmaceutical industry. In each market, you define the areas. How do you gauge? Just like the gross domestic product, try and have certain indicators which shows this is how the industry grew. And behavioral changes are one of the most key ones around. Today we stand on the cusp of the next big wave of improvements in health countries, outcomes, driven not just by new products, but by behavioral change. We are moving to a world in which more emphasis will be on gathering evidence to identify inventions that are most effective at improving health outcomes, and then realigning the behavior of all stakeholders, patients, providers, manufacturers and others. If you find that there are 10,000 compounds that are actually coming up for invention every time, down the line after 15-20 years you find only one compound coming out of all that, with billions of dollars going behind it. What's the reason? You need to actually focus yourself on the same thing. You need to look at the possible failure factors that are actually leading to failure of 9,999 compounds. Today, if a Tom is actually pricing its drug, let's say aspirin, at 100% more than what an emerging market brings out, it's that investment which has gone into that, which they are actually loading up. As Dr. Shivanand said, the price is actually getting loaded. Otherwise, what makes you feel that a 75 milligrams aspirin tablet in the US or Canada, and the same price if you look at in India, it's much cheaper here, much costlier there. They did put money behind it. Idea is basically that. Okay, let's look at the industry size. As per the survey, by 2016, the Indian industry, the pharmaceutical industry, I'm not just talking of clinical trials are just only one segment of it. The entire pharmaceutical industry is likely to be $27.3 billion by 2016. Today we are in 2012, 4 years down the line. No big deal, no big shake. What is it against $600 billion, which is going to be by 2013? We have seen it in the previous presentation. So it's minuscule. What is it that you're going to do to see that this particular figure actually grows exponentially? That is to find that you as an emerging market, all these countries, you got 26 of them, look at how best we could actually produce and make out the volumes to reach a much better rate. Now by 2016, if you're saying 27.3, if there is a better aligning of the emerging markets in the clinical trial segment, at least, we could definitely, I would say, treble or probably quadruple that particular thing. But it requires a lot of initiation. We will discuss some of the factors actually which makes them happen here. If you look at the way forward, pharmaceutical companies are more likely to have already begun to conduct clinical trials in emerging markets. More than 70% of pharmaceutical companies conduct clinical trials in emerging markets for the reasons of faster patient recruitment, for the reasons of better costing. At the end of the day, the bottom line is the cost. Pharmaceutical companies still are more likely to conduct most of their clinical trials in mature markets, 62% still, compared to life sciences and biotech pharmaceutical businesses, 56%, 50% respectively. The reason is they still have an apprehension about the emerging markets on two factors: quality, compliance. If you have the quality and compliance, I'm sure the tables would be turned around. Pharma companies are more likely to build a local infrastructure for clinical trial activities in emerging markets, while acquiring local infrastructure or using a contract research organization are both likely options for nearly 1/3 of biotech and biopharmaceutical participants in each case. Life science companies are as likely to build local infrastructure as they acquire organizations. I'm sure tomorrow, if there is going to be a more flexible approach by the Drugs Control General of India, with the help of all the organizations, I am sure India could have the possibility of reaching up to a much better, turnover in terms of the pharmaceutical industry. So what are factors that actually influence, emerging markets as preferred destinations for all these three: pharma, biotech, life sciences, whatever you say, biopharmaceuticals? So life science companies are more heavily influenced by the proven accuracy of patient safety data in emerging markets in their decision to offshore clinical trials. At the end of the day, your transparency in conducting a clinical trial, your process of actually capturing the adverse events, reporting the serious adverse events to ethical committees, the sponsors themselves, the regulators, the confidence that reposes makes the people have a look at emerging markets. That is the need of the hour. Okay, biotech, pharmaceutical and pharmaceutical companies indicated a higher percentage of technology spend will go towards augmenting data gathering and analysis from emerging markets compared to life sciences companies. At the end of the day, more than life sciences industries, biopharmaceuticals and biotech companies would definitely look at how the safety data of the patient is obtained. The mode of doing it, I just talked to one of my friends. He's actually into electronic technical document uploading, ETDC, whatever you say. Today, if you see in a CRO, in a contract research organization, where there is a report that needs to be sent, there are ways of doing it. You do it in an MS Excel sheet and then share it with them. And then you do it in a format with some hyperlinks so that it could be uploaded onto the US FDA site. The electronic document filing is very, very crucial. You need to have a good software to do it. What these companies abroad are looking at the emerging markets are that whether the CRO site at the emerging markets place has the facility of uploading a document electronically with the least amount of times, with more accuracy and a better presentation. So when it comes to the cloud, have you heard about the word cloud? It's not cloud 9, but the cloud computing is actually in the vogue now. It's better, most of the emerging markets take advantage of it in such a way that if you can actually convince a sponsor saying that when you do a cloud computing, you don't need to invest much on your hardware. You don't need to invest anything on your software. It is that you need to just have a server which is a virtual server. Okay, with all the safety precautions that are taken, it will be much easier for you to do it. And most of the people, I think, including the US FDA, looks at companies to have the cloud computing. So just 5% indicated that they don't leverage. In all the pharmaceutical industry, 95% of the people are in favor of cloud computing. So 37% expect to use both public and private clouds. It's not that you have your own cloud computing thing. You always can share with the public. So you can have a combo of that. Compared to 14% in biotech and biopharmaceutical business and 16% in life sciences. So 42% of those in the life sciences sector expect to use a private cloud inside their own data centers. Another case for emerging markets to look at. See, the more regulated you are, the more acceptable you would be. That's what actually we're talking about. So what you look at is significantly higher than 16% for pharmaceuticals and 25% for biotech and biopharmaceuticals. So life sciences industry is taking the best of the benefits of the cloud computing. A case for the rest of the segment of the industry to adopt, and definitely for the emerging markets to adopt. Just a very fast slide on what's happening in Americas. In terms of clinical trials, it's based on clinicaltrials.gov, which all of you have an access to. A 2009 figure tells you 80% of the clinical trials are performed in this matured area in the United States alone. In Canada, it's 12%, South America 4%, Central America 2%, Mexico 2%. So in terms of the emerging markets, the focus area now in the world is actually the emerging markets. Whether you talk of preclinical, phase 1, late stage, even bioequivalent studies, you have a whole lot of possibilities for the emerging markets to deliver. Out of all these trials, the cancer trials have got the prominence across. I'm happy to say that I'm associated with a couple of CROs here itself in Hyderabad, where some of the oncologists have started the CROs. I find in the past most of the people who have started clinical research organizations are businessmen. They're basically looking at assets and liabilities, profit and loss account. It's a bit different. I was just trying to talk to my friend from France here, Euromed. They actually look at only the business side. But when it comes to doctors getting into the CRO business, that shows actually the regulatory awareness, and that should bring a lot of confidence in the regulators to do it. Now, emerging market segments have got certain preferred locations. Even Russia and Africa, which are actually a part of the emerging markets, are looking up to Asia for doing many trials here. For one simple reason. Africa relatively is backward compared to Asia. Russia has communications problem. So keeping China aside, if you look at India, in Asia is a preferred destination. I'll discuss about other, nations of Asia, what are the constraints that we have in terms of the development of clinical trials there. See, the basic thing is starting from developing of a protocol, up to selecting of a trial, preparing to open the trial, recruiting and enrolling participants, managing the trial, retaining participants, then evaluating accrual and lessons learned. In this total gamut, Africa and Russia are looking at India, not just for manufacturing of the antiretrovirals, even for the clinical trials. This is Africa. They've done almost about 1900 studies as clinicaltrials.gov just in the antiretroviral segment. I don't need to tell you the importance of actually a contract research organization when it comes to execution of a clinical trial in the emerging markets. This is one of the very crucial ones where you need to actually take a good due diligence is required to actually carry it out. There is also an accent and local population in emerging markets. If you look at Japan, Mexico and Russia, they normally prefer clinical phase to be done with them. The rest of the things could be done in the rest of the world. Okay, let's say you take a typical bioequivalent study. Somebody would like to do a clinic in Japan. Those samples could always come to another emerging market, let's say India. They could get analyzed here. It could be, let's say, a pharmacokinetic analysis that's required. Somebody can also have a package to run out that, but there are experts, let's say, in this part of the world. They could always share that, right? So you've got a clinical phase, you've got a bioanalytical phase, you have documentation which includes the pharmacokinetic statistics and the reporting. The entire phases need not be done in one location. And in some cases, like Japan, like Mexico, like Russia, they prefer only their population is subjected to the drug testing, and then the samples could always go anywhere and then be done. So it's like intra emerging markets opportunity. One market could take samples from the other side and then analyze them and give it to them at a much better price. India, fortunately, has no such restrictions. And in fact, Indian population is supposed to be almost near to world's accepted population, Caucasian or whatever, and they represent one of the best, people when it comes to the clinical trials, excepting Japan, which actually looks at Brazil, Sao Paulo, which is supposed to be having a similar population there. They allow trials in Sao Paulo outside of Japan. That's the only place. Otherwise, there are no such restrictions in India as it is. As I was telling you, due diligence is one of the most important things when it comes to partnering. Like today, if you look at anything, people do a lot of outsourcing. You don't tend to do everything all yourself under one roof at your place. If, let's say, Dr. Reddy's is manufacturing ibuprofen, it may not have a time to actually carry out a phase 1 study, so they outsource the phase 1 study somewhere. So similarly, if there is some a derma study that's required, a company could always give it to a CRO to undertake that particular patch test. They would do it. So similarly, a CRO will have to be actually given some projects. So the clinical trials that come in emerging markets actually get importance from this. So essentially what you look at it is, you go look at the site concerned, whether they are properly compliant in terms of the record keeping, whether they have got proper quality assurance procedures defined, including the standard operating procedures they have, whether they have a proper auditing system, and a whole lot of things. So you do due diligence and then work it out and take that. And in the entire emerging market segment, what is expected of would be to ensure a local expertise is used both in operations as well as outsourcing. Just imagine a typical case of a clinical trial happening in Hyderabad. It's a phase 2 trial. Let's say it's an antipsychotic drug that's happening, Asha Hospital, and it's for a US sponsor. Okay, the monitor or the principal investigator belongs to the site here. It could be a third party monitor or the sponsor monitor themselves. Imagine a quality assurance person who is actually well versed with all the systems and procedures, including the regulations. He's updated. He comes and interacts with a medical person locally here, who's a doctor or a paramedical staff. I don't know how many of you have actually been through a clinical trial. It's a whole lot of managing that is required in terms of personal conflicts, egos. So what happens is, a guy who's actually locally here can manage the local trial much better than a guy who's outside. So somebody coming from US as a QA monitor comes and tells a medical doctor who's actually attending to antipsychotic trial in Hyderabad could make a lot of difference. So this can actually be experienced only than be discussed or talked about. So such expertise or lack of it can either make or break it. Even trying to actually interact with the investigator, requesting him to fill up a CRF or ICF would be a great thing sometimes. So what happens is, such connect, if it is not there, you are either making the project or marring it. So you should be really careful about it. So making sure the highest quality and compliance CROs and vendors need to be present into service of conducting a trial. Today, if you ask me, the only challenge against the entire emerging markets in conducting clinical trials is only on 2 grounds: quality and compliance. We'll talk more about it as we go about it. So quality system has to be there for every emerging market in terms of the quality assurance, quality control, regulatory affairs, more than that. See, quality control, quality assurance are attuned to an organization and a location, but it's the regulatory affairs people who look at the guidelines, update themselves and apprise, and then, if required, ensure the training needs are changed accordingly to see that the necessary updations are done. So that's the most important thing. So the topmost importance of regulatory affairs function in this spectrum, clearly identifying what is right and what is not. In the maze of regulations, whether the European Union, US FDA, or AFSAPS, NBSA, there could always be a confusion about some of the things. So This is exactly where somebody comes and then sits and then tries to look at, it's some sort of ICH. It's a harmonization of all the regulations. So it's the RA person who could do it. So rightfully so. There is what is the BRIC that is actually coming up now as a building now, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China. As you must be knowing in most papers also, you have these 4 countries are coming up as one of the most exclusive and powerful group in the emerging markets. So what are addressed in these big countries regarding clinical trials are key demographics, population, ethnic breakdowns, life expectancy statistics, key economic figures including gross domestic product, labor force, distribution of family income, disease prevalence, politics, healthcare system, pharmaceutical market, overall picture of market. I mean, leading local companies covering, bulk actives, formulations, biologics, biosimilars, and clinical trials. The whole gamut of pharmaceutical industry. There are 2 key favorable factors which emerging markets get. When you look at profit and loss and the risk factor, balancing it out, saving of the budgets and saving of time, I would like to stress more on this. These 2 are the major ones. It's something like without compromising on quality and compliance. There are specific advantages when it comes to populations in the BRIC nations. Why I said BRIC nations, other nations are also there. It's the strongest lobby that's coming up now. But depict more efficient and faster patient recruitment. In any clinical trial, what a sponsor requires are the least turnaround times. And majority of the time that is taken for a trial involves in patient recruitment. So better patient access is the one which emerging markets could assure. Better patient retention, flexible regulatory environment relatively. It's under quotes. You just take the example of India. If you look for application of a bioequivalence study, today you don't get it before 60th day. Sad state of affairs. The fact is that. So I would still like to say it is a flexible regulatory because in a way they are like a clean slate. Nothing is written on them. There are no fixations for them. It's just that they are not informed properly. That's why they keep it pending. Today the solution for it that somebody will have to ensure that they are trained better. When it comes to DCGI, let me be very vocal. I interact with a lot of CROs. I also get projects for them. I know the delays that happen. Half the people who are in the regulatory doesn't understand and distinguish between what's a bioequivalence study and what's a clinical trial. They have been deputed to the US FDA for trainings. I don't know what happened. But even today, there is an air of suspended animation. When you are one of the BRICS in the emerging market, you can't afford to have a lax regulatory setup. So what I would stress would be that in various fora, whether it is media or otherwise, we will have to waken up the regulator. I don't say just only for the business. Definitely business is what we are looking at. At the end of the day, business will have to happen. With such a large population, with such a varied population, with such a better informed population, we need to have a better regulator to get many projects into the emerging markets, where India is one. Established intellectual property laws and practices. I mean, if you look at it as the Tom and Jerry thing goes off, intellectual property rights are better here in terms of, the regulations, the way the things are. But how many patents are here for you to guard them? There are very few. So the IPR rules and regulations are maybe very old ones. At an appropriate time, we'll have to see that they are actually conditioned in such a way that we get back to the normalcy and then encourage research more so that people actually come here and then try and then do research. As Dr. Prakash was telling, I'm really happy that most of the Indians are trying to look at coming back to India. That's great, actually. But I think that particular, the feeling should be supported by us in terms of a proper and a timely regulatory response. Measures are in place to address cultural concerns. In terms of emerging markets, not many cultural concerns would be there. China looks at food in a different way. India might look at it in a different way. And then you look at inside the country itself, North India, South India, and then the East India, you find it different. If you conduct a study, let's say, where you require a high-fat breakfast as per the USFDA norm, in Hyderabad, you may probably give them a non-vegetarian, probably chicken or something like that, which goes up to the required calorific value. But when you go to Ahmedabad, you need to give them something vegetarian. So cultural concerns need to be taken into consideration when it comes to execution of trials. So each area in the emerging market should strengthen itself, update itself, and then keep all the things required so that the clinical trials could be conducted there. English language communication is one of the most sound around here, and even today China actually has made it very compulsory. In spite of their more efficient working, today it's because the language they are relegating themselves back, but I understand they now have made it very compulsory. They're all learning English. I mean, it's not actually a very alarming thing for India, but we need to be very careful about it, because that's one thing which has got us many projects. World-class clinical trial technology infrastructure is coming into place. I find now there are very good compliant CROs across. I mean, in terms of the infrastructure, the building, the power backup system, the water, the kind of water they take, the LCMS, the instruments, the chemicals that they use for it, they use the world-class chemicals now. A more economical supply chain management. Certainly, when you look at actually a multi-centric trial, the courier who actually gets the investigation drug product, the guy who actually sends the samples away from a central place to various CROs, it matters. Extensive investigators available knowledge base. I mean, you have one of the best, doctor population across here. I mean, the investigator people around here that could be tapped. Good IT background resulting in sound data standards. When you're looking at cloud computing or even normal computing, when you're looking at even normal Excel sheet preparation, you require a certain amount of IT background that's required in terms of a training. We have that particular thing. So better investigator standards than a decade ago, certainly. Looking at other Asian countries and other emerging markets, there is a lot needs to be desired in improvement of all these areas. In fact, this is the place where you have a very good chance for most of the Indians to take up training for those people in the rest of the emerging markets to take it up. I'm not just saying India. Any country which is famous in training the people could always do it with a lot of experience around. Extensive site management standards. Without data management needs sprucing up. You've got lot many site management offices that are there across in the emerging markets. So they are growing, and then things would definitely be much better. Few escalations, and hence anticipated cost doesn't go overboard and estimates abnormally. Most of the things are predictable, including a DCGI approval. So very, very geared up in terms of actually doing it. Scheduling a study and then executing it. The possibility of deviation on a schedule that is actually committed could be 10% in the current situation. There are a few measurable objectives. I wouldn't like to go much into that. Each country which is in the emerging market segment needs to actually keep some scores for themselves. India, let's say, United Arab Emirates or Japan, anybody, they would like to have, let's say, scores on two grounds. One is an environment, and the other one, the most important, the operations. So in the environment, you try to just score yourself up in terms of the available knowledge base, regulatory environment, intellectual property laws and practice, communication and language, culture, anticipated costs. So these are all the ones which you could gauge in the beginning of the year and at the end of the, let's say, the third year or fourth year. Operations, certainly one of the most crucial ones is the access to patients, patient retention rates, investigator standards, data standards, site management standards, trial technology, infrastructure, then the supply chain management. These are all the operations that you look at. Because none of these areas are perfect today. There is a large scope of improvement in each of these areas. One needs to actually list down what are required and then how to improve upon each of them. So companies adopting their working styles to leverage and strategize would look at, two factors. One is basically the experience in the region. In an emerging market, if you want a clinical trial, it doesn't just come from Pfizer's or Eli Lilly's, just like that. You need to actually show the experience in the region, experience specific to country, information on the company's operations within the country, including year of entry, method of entry, and current level of presence within the country. See, this goes to show how the company is experienced. It gives the necessary confidence to the sponsor. Clinical strategy in the country. This is one of the most important things. Each company's clinical operations assigned into groups, corporate team outside the country, corporate team inside the country, global CRO and local CRO, a vendor, which entails about 12 clinical responsibilities, which all of us know. Okay, one is basically the protocol development, site selection, investigator training, patient recruitment, site monitoring, investigator management, data collection, data management, data cleaning and analysis, medical writing, regulatory agency communication, then health economics consideration. See, it's not just sufficient to have a data, you need to have a clean data. Somebody would say, I have 200,000 patient database, but how clean is it? Is the one which needs to be seen there. So clinical environment and trial operations scores will have to be done by ensuring a SWOT analysis. What are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and then the threats that you have. On a company score for each of the clinical environment trial operations factors listed above could be recorded. So for all these operations, each market should actually make a list. If you're looking at, let's say, one country in the emerging markets, right, it needs to make a list of various CROs they have, manufacturing companies, the sort of drugs they get for testing, the therapeutic category, whether it's a cardiovascular or probably antipsychotic or metabolic disorder, whatever. So you need to have that. This is the information that you need to keep to ensure the regulator is given the confidence to come to you. What I call it as the confidence building measures. Nowadays what's happening in most of the emerging markets, the sites get confidence, or the regulator would believe a site if it is vetted by multiple regulators. In closer home in Hyderabad, you have seen, I think about 2 months back, 3 regulators came to inspect one site. It's a collaborative audit they have done. It's the US FDA, EMEA, and WHO, all the 3. They came and looked at it. What happens is that actually saves a lot of time and money, both for a CRO and for a sponsor. Reasons could be anything why they have come. It's material. I would only say that these 3 regulators, when they came, they reinstated a lot of confidence in the clinical research industry here, they being a part of the emerging markets. So what is expected of EM? I would close it off fast. This is the last but one slide that I have. While a growing body of research shows how corporate action on sustainability, the word is sustainability, can improve financial performance, the focus to date has been on companies in developed markets. Till now, the focus is on mature markets only. So based on analysis of more than 240 case studies in over 60 countries, there are some certain primary conclusions which are drawn. The business case for sustainability in emerging markets has been made. You need to sustain yourself in the right way. Okay? Identifying opportunities for businesses to reduce costs, increase sales, reduce risks, develop human capital, enhance access to capital from better corporate governance, and improved environmental practices and investments in social and economic development. Just because you put up a, let's say, bulk actives factory, you can't actually play with the environment the way you want it. You need to take the corporate social responsibility into your account and do it. That is one factor which also ensures the regulator gets impressed by you. This is a checklist for emerging markets to ensure that they match up. Last but never the least, as I've been telling, to build reputation of all the emerging markets by quality and compliance, which is the most important thing, of which today, thanks to Dr. Prakash and other seniors who have been coming here. If you go to US, I keep visiting American Association of Pharmaceutical Scientists, meet regularly, and Generics Pharma Association. definitely there is a lot to be desired in terms of actually establishing a confidence in the Indian pharma industry in general, clinical trials in particular. So what's the final conclusion? We would also discuss about the way forward. A business case matrix demonstrates graphically where the strongest links exist, while the present status highlights some variations by region as well as a company type. Overall, it is felt that there are compelling commercial reasons for emerging market companies to take action on sustainability. Tomorrow, if you want that second trial to come to you into the emerging markets, you better sustain that by being compliant and then quality executing. And to take a cue from this to compete with the emerging markets. So emerging markets giving you value in more ways than one. So this is the last word, which is the way forward for the industry. You must have heard about the Latin saying carpe diem. It means nothing but seize the day. Emerging markets need to actually capture the opportunity. As somebody said, opportunities never come knocking on the door, but when they come, you grab them. So it's that carpe diem I'm talking about. In order to successfully navigate the changing nature of drug discovery in all its levels, how it's done, the categories of the therapies to be explored, and where that research takes place, whether it's pharma, life sciences, and biotech companies, must take a proactive approach on many different fronts. They will have to reconsider supply management in the far-reaching global sphere. They will need to more quickly shore up weaknesses in database design and more quickly close the gaps that stubbornly persists around clinical trial data integration. And they will need to become more agile in analyzing data returns to avoid safety concerns, better harness opportunities to lower costs and more easily pinpoint issues, not just in patient data, but also in data regarding the conduct of the trials themselves. Even before a US FDA auditor gives you a 483, you should be in a position to internally audit yourself and say, something is wrong here. Let's correct it before even he comes. Globalizing new technologies, and at the same time that they are negotiating the parameters around creating footprints in emerging markets, they need to explore how new technologies such as the cloud, as I was telling you, may help them solve not just application issues across the globe, but specifically speed implementations in remote regions. So at the end of the day, I would like to actually close it on a very positive note. Let's get it right. And the future is brighter not just for drug industry companies, but also for people around the world who will benefit from new discoveries and better treatments. I just have one small example to tell you about how bad a logistics could really mar your timeline. It happened last month. I got a Hyderabad CRO which was supposed to conduct a clinical phase in Springfield in US. They did it. They were supposed to send the samples by 30th of September and the report was to get submitted by 31st of October. It just got delayed for a month's time and the report could not go and somebody else has done the FTF. You know what is FTF? First to file. Somebody else has got that. The sponsor is an Indian sponsor. He has spent 1.5 crores of rupees. I mean, you can convert it into dollars, how much ever it is. It's $125,000. Just a matter of 2 months, because the samples couldn't come in time. It's one of the couriers, the world famous couriers, we were supposed to get it. Now the customs query, it got stuck. It's coming from a mature market to an emerging market. So such is the effect. So anyway, on that note, again, please don't take it as a negative. That's an area for us to improve ourselves, how best we could get it, how best we can give a documentation so that the customs guy doesn't hold back your samples. It's as simple as that. So I thank, I would like to actually give credit to clinicaltrials.gov, from whom I have got a lot of information. And I have actually a small slide from Wipro and UBM, which I wouldn't like to hold you back for long in terms of statistics. It just shows, probably those who are interested, I could send them a mail to you. It shows in what way a specific factor in a clinical trial is regarded in a mature market and a emerging market. And Ernst & Young survey 2012, my associates in the pharma and clinical trials industry, and of course the WWW. Thank you very much. If any questions, I could take them. I expect a lot of you students actually are sitting here. Yeah, go ahead, sir. A mic for you, please.
Thank you, Mr. Prasad, for the very nice presentation. I want your opinion and view on one query which I have and one question. What I could say is initially around in 2005 there were a lot of clinical trials happening in India by the innovator, by MNCs coming to India. But I want your views. Is it that that exponential growth of number of clinical trials happening in India is somehow declining because of regulatory stringent requirement and weird queries by the regulatory DCGI, and if you're applying for a protocol approval, you never know when you'll get that approval. And again, our competitor like China, the clinical trials are moving out of India. That is what I could see, mainly to China than to.
I expect a lot of you students actually are sitting here. Yeah, go ahead, sir. A mic for you, please.
Thank you, Mr. Prasad, for the very nice presentation. I want your opinion and view on one query which I have and one question. What I could say is initially around in 2005 there were a lot of clinical trials happening in India by the innovator, by MNCs coming to India. But I want your views. Is it that that exponential growth of number of clinical trials happening in India is somehow declining because of regulatory stringent requirement and weird queries by the regulatory DCGI, and if you're applying for a protocol approval, you never know when you'll get that approval. And again, our competitor like China, the clinical trials are moving out of India. That is what I could see, mainly to China, then to Philippines, Malaysia, and Hong Kong. So, what is your opinion on this? And secondly, my question is on clouding. So, you are saying that more than 95%, almost 95% of the industry is moving towards cloud. My question is how secure my data would be if I cloud my data, clinical trial data, patient safety data, drug profile data in that. Because we recently, in our organization, we recently got one database, and in that database, instead of going to clouding, we got licenses of that database. Just thinking that my data integrity would not be there in cloud. Thank you.
Yeah. I can't help agree with you when you say that the clinical trials are going away from India, and it's a fact. I agree with you. I've seen the thing that's happening around here. Specifically, a year back, an incident happened with one of the CROs for the clinical part. It has really actually been found to be very, very trivial. And most of the things were unfounded. It's actually on this stage of Homix, one of the conference, I think it was in bioavailability, bioequivalence, the local drug authority, he happened to come here. He has said that most of the things that were actually written about, shown about in the TV, I'm sorry for the media who are actually here, they're over-enthusiastic media people who try to, focus on the wrong things, sensationalizing the things. The drug regulator himself happened to say, yes, most of the things are found to be wrong. They're not found to be right. So a lot of things actually happened during that time. There was a time, but almost for 6 months, there were no volunteers for CROs when it comes to clinical trials. DCGI was frequently inspecting the CROs. In a way, on the flip side, it is good that it happened because the industry actually is now becoming more compliant. It's welcome. Certainly, trials have gone down dramatically. Almost about a quarter back, another incident happened where this time it's not clinics, it's the analytics which have actually got exposed again for the wrong reasons. And this time, as I told you, the 3 regulators who happened to come and see it. We were all actually very, very anxious to listen to what happened to that, the tri-body inspection. Luckily for all of us, it turned out to be positive in the sense that the regulators went without any observations and they found that everything was compliant. Due to these factors, a lot of clinical trials have got shifted away from India. If you're looking at, I'm not looking at the other emerging markets in India. Yes, I remember a Bachupalli-based sponsor happened to actually shift out more than 10 clinical trials away from Hyderabad into US. One CRO actually has slowed down its operations and opened up a Mexico setup totally. I mean, they're operating now there. I would like to say one thing. There was an opportunity for me also to interact with the Pharmexil about 2-3 weeks back, where the president was actually telling about all the factors that are happening. In a place like Canada, if you go and say, I'd like to conduct a trial, this is my protocol, within 7 days, if you don't get an approval, you go ahead and do the trial. It's like, silence is acceptance. I mean, that's the level of, regulatory compliance they have. Today, if India has to have a similar situation from those 60 days once to 7 days, I mean, it's the onus lies on the industry to comply. Okay, we are compliant equally than anybody else. So in that sense, both these factors were, whatever happened, were good for the CRO industry, and they made the guys who were sleeping get up, pull up their socks, and then ensure that things are done. But for you to recover, to go back to the old high volume trials that happen here, I'm sure it's going to take some time. It's going to happen for sure. It's going to take some time. When you go to AAPS, you find 50% of the Indians are there. Whether they are a part of the US FDA, or they are working in pharma companies there in the US, are going from here to look at the expositions of meeting and then networking. So there is absolutely no necessity for us to really worry about on that part. But on the regulator part, my fingers are crossed. If you ask me, I am not very sure. When once I apply today for a paracetamol, which is as old as hills, DCGI still takes its own 45 days. Now, what makes actually them to take so much of a time? It's the government which has to really put forward and see that the things are done in the compliant way. Do they have to change the staff and then recruit better people who understand what is pharma, what is a bioequivalence study, what is a clinical trial? A lot of initiatives are required. I find probably compared to the US, we are more indulgent when it comes to politics. A lot of people intervene everywhere, whether it is in the cinema industry or pharmaceuticals. A lot of political influences that needs to be actually toned down. Let's bring in more professionals into it who would appreciate what are the difficulties. See, tomorrow when you're actually dosing a small study, if there is an adverse event of, let's say, vomiting or probably syncopal attack, you don't get worried about that. Those things are expected adverse events. Right? So what is required is for the paramedical staff, for the clinical research associates, for the quality assurance and regulatory affairs people, for the operations guys, for the regulator, for even the volunteer who needs to be not worried about small things that happen, there has to be certain constant training that is required to be inducted. I would say that anyway, pharma industry has a lot of structures for training. Everybody has to be informed. Somebody said ICF is very important for a trial. In fact, information has to be there for everybody who's connected. All the stakeholders, including the investors in a company which runs a CRO and a pharma company, should have that. So in terms of the regulator, my dear friend, my fingers are crossed. I'm not really sure how can they really, come up to your expectations. It's a very sad state of affairs when it comes to DCGI. I'm sorry to say that. I had been there many times. Quite disappointed, but I think during the last Dr. Surendra Singh's term, during his term, a lot of things have happened in a positive way, and they have got trained by USFDA people. They made visit, they went all the way there, and I think that's going to continue. It's a matter of time when it happens actually. So regulatory compliance and then knowledge, I think, would really bring it. Right now, clinical trials are going very slow. There is a suspended animation at this point of time. Even though DCGI approvals come, they come very few and far between. But definitely they are looking at India as a destination where better trials could be conducted. As I was telling you, even the regulator will have to distinguish between a clinical trial executing company in terms of a businessman run company and a scientific person run company, a professional. a medical professional at that if possible. Okay, so that distinction would bring a better understanding. Even the regulator need not hesitate when somebody puts up a protocol. Hey, what is this protocol? Isme kya rakha hai? So something like that. So I am sure in future things would be much better. I would like to be optimistic. I better be anyway, because unless we are optimistic, we can't really go ahead. And of course, it's not a rocket science to think about some of the things. And let me tell you, why do you get actually a smoke without a fire? If somebody is accused of a specific thing,